These are the most interesting historical photos and unusual objects from the past. Let's get 100,000 subscribers. British built large family camps for Boer civilians during the Second Boer War. From 1900 to 1902, about 28,000 women and children died in 45 camps, mostly from hunger and illness. After the fall of Saigon in 1975, as many as 2 million people fled Vietnam by small boats across the South China Sea. Many were lost to storms, thirst, and pirate attacks before global rescue and asylum efforts grew in the late 1970s. During the Siege of Leningrad, children faced the winter of 1941 to 1942, with rations as low as 125 grams of bread a day. The bread often contained sawdust and oil cake, leaving many children weakened and many survivors small for the rest of life. Icelandic parents once let babies nap outdoors in winter, even at about 10 degrees below zero, believing fresh air builds strong health. The custom still appears in Nordic towns today, with warm layers and nearby adults. In the American South, chain gangs worked on roads well into 1955, with men linked by leg chains in long lines. Most were black and jailed for minor charges like vagrancy or debts, laboring up to 12 hours in heavy heat. France held its last public execution by guillotine in 1939, and a huge crowd came like a street fair. Shocked by the scene, officials soon banned public executions. In Australia, pass rules kept many Aboriginal people from leaving reserves without written permits, and some were still led in chains in the 1960s. A national vote in 1967 began to end these controls and forced labor systems. Tonsu was a Korean folk tonic made by fermenting rice with a small amount of infant stool, believed to be pure. Until the 1970s, some pharmacies sold it as a cure for many illnesses. From 1932 to 1933, a forced grain policy and village travel bans in Ukraine led to a vast famine. About 7 million people died as many ate bark and grass, and taking photos was banned by the state. During the Amazon rubber boom from 1890 to the 1920s, many indigenous people were forced into harsh labor. A Peruvian company was blamed for about 40,000 deaths and abuses until a global outcry reached the League of Nations. During the Irish famine, coffin ships crowded about 900 people into holds meant for 300, with poor air and hygiene. As many as 30% died from disease on the voyage, and sailors reported sharks following the ships for weeks. In the Soviet Union, arrested scientists worked in special prison design bureaus with drafting tables and guards at the door. From these rooms came early jet planes, radar, and the first Soviet atomic bomb, while failure could bring severe punishment. Mao-era communes ran big dining halls, and home cooking and pots were taken away. From 1959 to 1961, many ate about 200 grams of porridge a day, and about 36 million lives were lost, while dropping empty bowls was called sabotage. In the Cold War, a secret program gave mind-altering drugs and forced long wakefulness to more than 20,000 people without consent. One scientist died after a fall, and many records were destroyed in 1973. After Stalin died, over 1 million prisoners were freed, but ordered to settle far away in Siberia, not allowed to return home. Many were dropped at remote stations with no housing or work, and some did not survive the first winter or went back to the camps for shelter. The White Sea Canal was dug in only 20 months by about 126,000 prisoners using hand tools in frozen ground. Between 12,000 and 25,000 people died, and the canal was too shallow for big ships. Yet it was called a triumph. Nanai shamans kept spirit boxes with up to 100 items, each a helper spirit for healing or protection. No outsider could open it, and when the shaman passed, the box was burned or set afloat in a river. In the 1930s, the Dust Bowl turned the Great Plains into a sea of dust, with storms as high as 3 kilometers burying farms in hours. About 2.5 million people left their homes, crops failed for 8 years. Hanging coffins in Sagada sit on sheer cliffs, sometimes about 100 meters above the ground. For nearly 2,000 years, elders carved their own wooden coffins so the departed would rest closer to the sky. In 1958, a campaign urged crowds to beat drums and chase sparrows until the birds could not rest, and many died. With sparrows gone, insects swarmed, fields failed, and a great famine took about 36 million lives. Hikikomori in Japan are people who stay in one room for years and avoid going outside. Over 1 million live this way, often supported by parents through the door since the 1980s. At the Brussels exhibition in 1897, 267 people from Congo were displayed in a fenced village as a show. 7 died from cold and illness within 6 months, and their bodies were sent back to Congo. The Viet Cong built a tunnel network about 250 kilometers long, only 80 centimeters high, with clinics, classrooms, and small theaters. People lived for months without sunlight, and many lives were lost underground during attempts to close the tunnels. Red Guards held public shaming of teachers, doctors, and writers, making them wear tall hats and confess. Over 10 years, about 2 million people died, and children reported on parents as the country fell into chaos. In Haiti, the Tonton Macoutes were a secret force in dark glasses and denim that held power for about 30 years. About 60,000 lives were lost, and many people believed these men were like zombies that bullets could not harm. At Alcatraz, the hole was a tiny concrete cell about 1.5 by 3 meters, kept almost dark with no bed or toilet. People could be held up to 19 days, and some left with long-lasting trauma from the silence and isolation. Jardim Gramacho in Rio became one of the largest waste dumps on Earth, where families built small homes beside rising hills of refuse. For decades, children picked recyclables to survive. The dump closed in 2012, but the community stayed. Victorian workhouses confined the poor to hard labor like stone, breaking for about 10 hours a day in exchange for a bowl of soup. Families were split and silence was enforced, so many chose the street over this harsh refuge. After the atomic bombings, about 650,000 survivors in Japan lived with keloid scars and higher risks of cancer and infertility. Known as hibakusha, many faced stigma in marriage and work for decades, even though they posed no risk to others. Historic photo of Tanka boat dwellers in Hong Kong Harbor. Many women and girls in this world faced forced work and harsh control on the water, a hidden chapter now condemned. Gesche Gottfried of Bremen slipped arsenic into food for 15 family and friends over 15 years, chasing money and pity. In 1831, she faced a public execution before about 35,000 onlookers. In Old Russia, performing bears were led from village to village with nose rings and chains, a show that lasted until the 1920s. Harsh training and many accidents helped end this trade. In Kimberley, black miners crawled in tunnels about 50 centimeters high and worked 14 hours to chip diamond rock. If someone hit a stone, overseers forced castor oil to recover it later. Until 1906 in Persia, a harsh public punishment tied a person to 4 horses pulling in opposite ways. It ended in the early 1900s as laws changed and such displays were banned. Spirit photographers in Japan used double exposure, so a faint ghost of a loved one appeared in family portraits. The paid sessions stayed popular into the 1920s, even after the trick was exposed in the 1890s. In the 19th century, over 26,000 children worked in British coal mines, crawling in tunnels about 40 centimeters high. A law in 1842 banned child mining, but weak enforcement kept it going for years. On Sakhalin Island, about 10,000 prisoners worked long hours in mines with heavy leg irons and slept in crowded barracks. Anton Chekhov visited in 1890 and wrote it was far worse than Siberian exile, and few left healthy. In 1818, engineer William Cubitt built the prison treadwheel, where men walked a giant wheel for many hours each day. Many collapsed from the strain, and writers called it the hardest labor in Victorian jails. Medieval night workers cleared cesspits by hand, where bad air and deep waste often took lives. In 1326, a London worker named Richard Raker fell into a pit and suffocated, yet this was one of the few jobs open to outcasts. In 1897 in Brazil, an Italian researcher injected people with yellow fever germs without consent to test a theory. 3 died, and the scientific world called it deeply immoral, yet he was never punished. From the 1880s to the 1920s, thousands of boys aged 8 to 14 worked as coal breakers in Pennsylvania, sitting 10 to 12 hours over moving chutes, picking rock by hand. Many suffered crushed fingers and early lung disease for only pennies, powering an industry built on child labor. On 2 July 1900, Count Zeppelin's airship LZ-1 rose from Lake Constance at Friedrichshafen, the first rigid airship built on a light aluminum frame. That short test sparked a craze that soon brought regular passenger routes and record flights in the 1930s. On September 8, 1900, the Galveston hurricane leveled the island and took at least 6,000 lives, the deadliest natural disaster in United States history. The city answered by building an 8-mile seawall up to 17 feet high. On September 8, 1900, the Galveston hurricane leveled the island and took at least 6,000 lives, the deadliest natural disaster in United States history. The city built an 8-mile seawall up to 17 feet high and raised the island with sand while lifting thousands of buildings. In 1903, a physicist became the first woman to win the Nobel Prize in Physics after isolating radium and polonium. The soft glow in her lab hinted that hidden energy in tiny atoms could power new ways to heal and to see inside the body. Paris, August 1903. Smoke rises from the young metro as crowds move to safety. The shock led cities to add clearer exits, emergency lights, and safer trains. In 1932, Australia sent soldiers to protect farms from fast emu flocks, but the birds outran every plan at up to 50 kilometers per hour. This odd episode shows how wildlife can beat human tactics. On January 15, 1919, a giant molasses tank in Boston burst, sending 8 million liters of syrup through the streets at up to 56 kilometers per hour and as high as 8 meters. The sticky wave sparked stronger safety codes and regular checks for storage tanks. On March 1, 1910, an avalanche in the Cascade Mountains swept over 2 stalled trains near Wellington, Washington. It became the largest avalanche disaster in United States history and pushed railroads to add snow sheds and better weather watch. In 1901, Hubert Booth built a motor-powered vacuum so big it sat on a horse-drawn cart. Crews parked outside and ran long hoses through windows to clean whole houses. On December 14, 1911, Roald Amundsen and his Norwegian team became the first to reach the South Pole. Careful planning, strong sled dogs, and sun angle readings put them a month ahead of Robert Scott. On May 8, 1902, Mount Pelée erupted and an ash cloud engulfed St. Pierre in minutes. Only 2 people survived, a prisoner protected by a thick cell and a shoemaker on the far edge of town. In 1908, the Thor brought an electric drum and wringer into the home, turning a full day of washing into a few hours. This metal workhorse began the era of home machines that traded muscle for motors. On August 9, 1902, Edward VII was crowned after a near 2-month delay for an emergency operation. At age 60, he took the throne and turned royal parades into grand public pageantry seen in early news films. On April 18, 1906, a magnitude 7.9 quake struck San Francisco and fires burned for 3 days, leaving most of the city in ruins. The shock spurred modern study of the San Andreas Fault and strict building rules that shaped the skyline. On March 25, 1911, a fire at the Triangle factory trapped workers behind locked doors and 146 did not make it out. The outrage pushed New York to pass strong safety rules and grow new labor unions. On December 6, 1917, a munitions ship in Halifax Harbor exploded, making one of the biggest non-nuclear blasts in history. The shock wave and sea surge leveled streets in seconds and reshaped port rules and emergency planning worldwide. On May 31, 1911, Titanic slid into the water at Belfast as 100,000 people cheered. Less than a year later, after hitting an iceberg and carrying too few lifeboats, over 1,500 lives were lost. On December 12, 1901, Guglielmo Marconi heard 3 short clicks in Newfoundland, the Morse letter S sent from England across the sea. Those dots showed radio waves could ride the sky and cross 3,500 kilometers. In October 1907, a market panic hit Wall Street as many New York banks closed their doors. John Pierpont Morgan gathered bankers in his library and put in his own money, a rescue that later pushed the nation to create the Federal Reserve. On July 25, 1909, Louis Blériot flew a fragile monoplane across the English Channel in 37 minutes to win a newspaper prize. His rough landing at Dover still made history, proving the sea no longer kept Britain beyond the reach of the air. On May 26, 1896, Nicholas II was crowned in the Kremlin as the last Russian emperor. 3 days later, a crowd crush on Kodinka Field took more than 1,400 lives, a grim omen for the Romanov Line. In April 1906, Mount Vesuvius hurled 100 million cubic meters of ash and lava, coating Naples and nearby towns. Early photographers recorded the scene as villages were buried and over 200 lives were lost. In 1901, the Oldsmobile Curved Dash became the first mass-produced car in America and proved a simple, light car could change daily life. Nearly 19,000 sold in 5 years for about $650, opening the road to the middle class. In 1911, a Paris charity held a public raffle to place infants from an orphanage into homes, with officials approving strict checks. Odd by today's standards, it aimed to fund care and find families rather than offer goods. On September 23, 1911, pilot Earl Ovington flew the first official airmail in the United States, carrying 640 letters and postcards from Garden City to Mineola. The 5-minute hop showed mail could leap over roads and turn hours into minutes. On January 23, 1909, the liner Republic sent the first SOS in history after a nighttime accident at sea. Radio operator Jack Binns kept tapping for 14 hours, guiding ships that saved about 1,500 people. On February 4, 1912, a French tailor jumped from the first platform of the Eiffel Tower to test a parachute suit he made. The 57-meter fall was filmed by news crews, and he did not survive. In 1903, Edwin Porter made The Great Train Robbery, a 12-minute story that changed film. It used parallel action and close-ups, and the last frame felt so real that crowds ducked in their seats. On October 4, 1918, a New Jersey munitions plant erupted in a chain of 100 blasts over 3 hours, flattening 300 buildings. The shock was felt 150 kilometers away, and shell pieces even landed on Manhattan. On December 30, 1903, a fire swept the Iroquois Theater in Chicago during a holiday show, and 602 people did not survive. Locked exits and false fire doors revealed hidden safety flaws and pushed America to remake building codes. At the 1904 St. Louis Olympics, officials limited water on purpose as runners struggled on dusty roads in 32-degree heat. Thomas Hicks won after being given a stimulant mix and brandy, while the first man to reach the finish had ridden a car for 18 kilometers. In 1915, a hurricane lifted ocean ships onto Texas City streets and left them like stranded giants. Waves rose to 5 meters and carried some vessels nearly 1 kilometer inland. At least 27 workers were lost building the Brooklyn Bridge, and many suffered caisson sickness from high-pressure work under the river. Chief Engineer Washington Roebling, weakened by the illness, directed the project for 11 years from his window. Before home refrigerators, crews carved millions of tons of river and lake ice each winter and packed it in sawdust for summer use. The trade even shipped New England ice to India, while workers balanced on shifting slabs that could crack without warning. On July 9, 1918, two crowded passenger trains met head-on near Nashville after a dispatch mistake. The impact took 101 lives as wooden cars splintered and the engines folded, making one of the worst rail disasters in the United States. In March 1913, Dayton turned into a lake as water rose 1 meter an hour and reached 6 meters deep. The shock led to the Miami Conservancy Plan, a new network of dams and levees that other cities later copied. On October 8, 1871, a firestorm rushed through Peshtigo in 2 hours as winds spun whirling flames. While Chicago burned the same night, this became the deadliest forest fire in United States history, remembered for its speed and heat. On March 10, 1876, Alexander Graham Bell spoke the first words by telephone, calling to his assistant in the next room. He had just spilled a chemical on himself, and that sudden call became the start of modern voice communication. On October 17, 1814, a huge vat burst at a London brewery, sending 1.5 million liters of beer into the streets as a 4-meter wave. Homes fell, 8 lives were lost, and some residents tried to scoop the brew into buckets, a strange scene that shaped new safety rules. In September 1919, a police strike left Boston without patrols for 3 days, and crowds broke shop windows and took goods. State forces moved in, restored calm, and the city soon set new rules for pay and public safety. Before small electric motors, many factories used line shafts and belts driven by one big steam engine. Some shops even tried pedal power for short runs, but electricity soon ended the tangle of belts and made each machine safer and faster. In 1900, more than 6,000 people in England fell sick after beer was tainted with arsenic from sulfuric acid used to clear it. The scandal reshaped food rules and pushed breweries to test every batch. On September 3, 1925, the airship USS Shenandoah broke apart in a storm over Ohio at 2,000 meters. A nose section with 7 aboard drifted like a balloon for 30 kilometers and landed gently, saving many lives. On July 30, 1916, blasts at Black Tom Island lit the night and shook windows across New York, even damaging the Statue of Liberty's torch. The shock led to tighter harbor security, and the torch stayed closed to visitors for many years. In 1907, the stock market plunged about 50% in 3 weeks, and breadlines stretched for blocks as jobs vanished. Financier J.P. Morgan rallied bankers and used his own funds to steady the system, a rescue that helped inspire the future Federal Reserve. In 1911, Pennsylvania coal mines averaged 3 worker deaths a day from cave-ins, gas, and blasts. Even after a 1910 federal safety law, many operators lagged on protections and underground risk stayed high. On 25 July 1909, Louis Blériot flew a fragile monoplane across the English Channel in 37 minutes, then landed hard in a Dover field with a damaged craft and a place in history. His crossing proved a shoreline was no barrier anymore. In April 1914, a coal company pumped water into strike-hit tunnels, turning them into underground lakes, where 11 miners lost their lives in darkness. The disaster sparked days of armed confrontation, drawing national attention. Historic photo from the Mexican Revolution shows soldiers aiming in a line while a captive stands by a post. Many images from that conflict were printed as postcards and news sheets to shape public opinion. This ruined town shows the path of the tri-state tornado of March 1925, the longest continuous tornado track on record. It crossed 3 states in about 3.5 hours and leveled whole blocks with almost no warning. A blast at the Silvertown Munitions Works in London on January 1917 lit the sky and shattered a wide area. Fueled by about 50 tons of explosive, the shock was heard 150 kilometers away and stood as Britain's largest peacetime blast before World War II. Britain's giant airship R-101 fell near Beauvais, France on October 5, 1930, during its first long voyage to India, taking 48 of 54 on board, including the Air Minister. The hydrogen burned fast, and the loss ended Britain's dream of luxury skyliners. This towering dust wall on Black Sunday, April 14, 1935, rolled across the Great Plains like a moving night. Winds near 100 kilometers per hour lifted millions of tons of topsoil into the air and carried it to the Atlantic Ocean. A hidden gas leak at New London School in Texas built up and erupted on March 18, 1937, dropping walls and floors in seconds. The loss changed safety rules worldwide, as odor was added to natural gas so people could smell leaks. In 1903, a circus held a grand funeral parade for its star horse, Beauty, across Manhattan. Crowds filled the streets, and the lavish send-off cost more than most human burials, sparking a press scandal. Prohibition agents smashed barrels while the United States ordered industrial alcohol to be denatured with methanol so it could not be used as drink. Bootleg reprocessing fooled drinkers, and thousands were harmed across the country. The Quebec Bridge collapsed into the St. Lawrence River on August 29, 1907, after engineers underestimated the weight and the steel gave way in seconds. 75 workers were lost, and the event reshaped bridge safety rules worldwide. In January 1925, Nome, Alaska faced a diphtheria outbreak, and the needed antitoxin was about 1,000 kilometers away in -40 cold. 20 mushers and dog teams rushed it by relay in 5.5 days, saving the town and later inspiring the Iditarod. A space rock about 100 kilograms broke through a garage roof in Michigan in September 1938. It punched through a car and left a hot crater on the floor, becoming one of the first well-recorded hits on a home. On November 26, 1922, Howard Carter opened the sealed doorway to Tutankhamun's tomb and saw more than 5,000 objects still in place. The discovery sparked a worldwide Egypt craze. On July 24, 1911, Professor Hiram Bingham was led by a local farmer to the overgrown Inca city of Machu Picchu for $1. The place was known to nearby families, but his report made it famous around the world. During the Great Depression, dance marathons kept couples moving for weeks for prize money and a hot meal. Crowds bought tickets while worn-out dancers swayed, slept on their feet, and sometimes collapsed on the floor. An archival scene shows a colonial officer walking with 2 Aboriginal men in neck chains on a rural road. Records show neck chains were used by police in parts of Australia into the 1930s. And photos like this now help teach that history. In the winter of 1936 to 1937, General Motors workers in Flint staged a sit-down strike and lived on the factory floor for 44 days. Their stand won union recognition and reshaped pay, safety, and bargaining across American industry. In the late 1920s, pole sitting became a craze, and Alvin Shipwreck Kelly stayed on a 15-meter pole for 49 days. He slept 15 minutes each hour and took food by rope, while crowds paid to watch the strange feat. In the early 1900s, labs tested electric current on volunteers to learn how nerves and muscles respond. Debate over these trials later pushed new ethics rules and safer medical machines. On March 1, 1912, Captain Albert Berry made the first parachute jump from an airplane over Missouri at about 460 meters. The chute was tied to the plane and opened after the leap. He untangled the lines and landed safe, proving pilots could survive air trouble. In spring 1994, Coxey's army of about 500 jobless workers walked roughly 600 kilometers to Washington to ask for public works jobs. Police arrested the leaders for stepping on the Capitol lawn, and the attempt still set the pattern for later marches on Washington. On May 8, 1902, Mount Pelee sent a 1,000-degree ash cloud into St. Pierre and erased the city in about 2 minutes. One man lived by chance in a thick-walled cell, Louis Auguste Cyprus, later pardoned and shown on tour as a witness. In March 1912, Captain Robert Scott and two teammates halted in their tent only 18 kilometers from a food depot after the South Pole race. Their diaries were written to the end, and beside them lay 16 kilograms of rock samples they had carried to save for science. Silent-era stunt teams did real flying tricks, with pilots jumping from wings to moving trains while cameras rolled. In 1927 alone, several pilots were lost in crashes, giving the group a dark nickname in the trade. On September 25, 1911, the French battleship Liberté suffered a magazine blast in the harbor of Toulon. The force hurled 20-ton armor pieces nearly 1 kilometer and damaged nearby ships and buildings, later tied to unstable propellant used across the fleet. In July 1897, Swedish engineer Salomon André tried to reach the North Pole by hydrogen balloon. After 65 hours, the craft came down on the ice. The team walked for 2 months and became stuck on an island, and in 1930, searchers found them with film that showed their final days. In 1908, surgeon Harvey Cushing removed a brain tumor and showed that brain surgery could be done with care. His new ways to control bleeding and pressure cut death rates from about 90% to near 10% and launched modern neurosurgery. Farmers in China first hit the buried warriors while digging a well in 1914, but the find went quiet. Full digs in 1974 revealed around 8,000 clay soldiers from 2,200 years ago, each with a different face. In March 1918, the U.S. Navy collier Cyclops vanished on a trip from Barbados to Virginia with 309 aboard. No distress call or wreck was found, which fed Bermuda Triangle tales, though the likely reasons were heavy cargo and a storm. Endurance swim marathons in the 1920s kept racers circling a pool for up to 87 hours. Crowds watched swimmers faint from fatigue, and many cities later banned the contests for safety. On January 10, 1860, the 5-story Pemberton Mill in Massachusetts collapsed without warning, trapping hundreds of workers, many women and children. Brittle cast-iron columns and fire from kerosene lamps made the wreck far worse. On February 14, 1929, a fake police raid in a Chicago garage targeted a rival crew during the Prohibition era. The shock pushed authorities to pursue Al Capone more aggressively and turned the case into a legend of organized crime. On October 6, 1907, a ladle with about 4 tons of molten steel burst at a Pennsylvania mill, sending metal near 1,600 degrees across the floor. The blast took 24 lives and led to stricter safety gear and new rules for pouring and transport. United States Army doctors in Cuba tested the mosquito theory of yellow fever in 1900 using volunteer soldiers in screened tents. Their proof that mosquitoes spread the disease led to control programs that saved cities and made the Panama Canal possible. During the 1897 plague in Bombay, British doctors tested an early vaccine on local people without true consent. The forced drive sparked protests and later oversight, while improved vaccines went on to protect millions. At the St. Louis World's Fair in 1904, organizers displayed about 1,200 Filipinos in staged villages to promote United States rule. Visitors paid to watch staged tribal life, and the Apache leader Geronimo sold autographs there to live through the exhibit. In the 1920s, millions drank radium water as a cure-all, and wealthy ebon buyers reportedly consumed about 1,400 bottles in 3 years. He later suffered bone decay and was buried in a lead coffin, a glowing warning that ended the craze. In spring 1939, a campus craze had students swallowing live goldfish in contests, and one record claimed 89 in a single sitting. Public outcry and health scares soon ended the fad. In 1907, Prince Scipione Borghese drove an Itala from Beijing to Paris and won the Peking to Paris race in 60 days. Crews dragged cars through rivers, fixed engines in the steppe, and proved a car could replace the horse for long travel. On October 24, 1901, 63-year-old teacher Annie Taylor went over Niagara Falls in a wooden barrel and lived. She hoped for fame and money, but later struggled while her missing barrel became a legend. Early inventors built water shoes, big wooden floats tied to the feet, hoping to walk across ponds like a stage wonder. Most trials flipped and tangled the straps, yet people kept testing the idea for decades. In 1910, London physician Hawley Crippen fled across the Atlantic with his partner disguised as a boy after his wife vanished. The ship's captain radioed a warning, the first police arrest aided by wireless telegram, making the case a landmark in modern detection. In 1919, a German inventor tested a compressed air rocket backpack that could lift a person a few meters for a few seconds. Poor control and hard landings ended the trials, but the idea seeded the jetpacks that arrived in the 1960s. In May 1910, newspapers said Earth would pass through Halley's comet tail, and rumors claimed it held a toxic gas called cyanogen. Crowds rushed for gas masks and anti-comet pills, sealed windows, and held all-night skywatches as shopkeepers made a fortune on fear. In 1934, naturalist William Beebe and engineer Otis Barton descended in a steel bathysphere to 923 meters off Bermuda, peering through a single quartz window at glowing deep-sea life never seen before. The 1.5-meter sphere hung by a cable from the ship, where even a tiny leak would have meant instant mission failure. Atlantic City, 1921, an early U.S. child beauty contest, put girls as young as 7 on stage to be scored by adult judges for poise and perfect proportions. The spectacle ignited debate and helped launch a pageant industry that remains controversial a century later. In the late 1920s, promoters built rooftop ski ramps on skyscrapers, sending jumpers into safety nets or onto nearby roofs for newsreel cameras. The sky-high shows drew huge crowds and tourism money, turning city skylines into stages for daring publicity. From the 1920s to the 1970s, Atlantic City's Steel Pier packed crowds for diving horse shows, where riders guided horses off platforms up to 18 meters into a 3-meter pool. Safety controversies and headline injuries mounted over the years. From 1922 to 1934, Leonard Woolley uncovered the royal tombs of Ur, a 4,500-year-old Sumerian cemetery rich with gold lyres and lapis. One queen's tomb held 74 attendants arranged in careful rows. The Lumiere autochrome, introduced in 1907, brought true color to photography, but demanded rock-steady setups and exposures that could last minutes. In World War I, French photographers used these plates at the front, preserving trench life. After 1865, Southern states used vagrancy and minor offense laws to push many Black Americans into convict leasing and chain gangs, rented to companies to build roads and do heavy work, shackled in pairs and driven for up to 16 hours in any weather. Helen Duncan, a 1920s medium, stunned audiences by materializing spirits with ectoplasm from her mouth, later shown to be swallowed cheesecloth and paper. In 1944, she was prosecuted under Britain's Witchcraft Act of 1735, the law's final conviction. In 1911, color pioneer Sergei Prokudin-Gorsky photographed Emir Alim Khan of Bukhara in a rare early color portrait showing silk robes, ornate jewelry, and a white ceremonial saber inside the palace. The muted reds and blues come from his experimental 3-plate method and a century of aging. In 1923, inventor W. H. Murphy publicly tested a layered silk vest by having a .38 caliber revolver discharged at close range. The rounds flattened against the fabric and did not penetrate. The daring demo popularized modern body armor for police and pilots. On May 23, 1939, the submarine USS Squalus sank to 73 meters after a valve failure, with 26 sailors lost in the flooded aft sections. 33 survivors endured 40 hours until the McCann rescue chamber lifted them out one by one. In 1913, militant suffragettes wrecked a house being built for David Lloyd George, leaving it a hollow shell. Led by Emmeline Pankhurst, the campaign escalated from window smashing to coordinated property damage at churches, museums. Prohibition agents staged headline raids, smashing barrels as the government tallied up to 300 busts a week. Behind the show, payoffs reportedly reached tens of millions. Al Capone alone was said to spend about $30 million a year. On a 16 April 1912, Harriet Quimby became the first woman to cross the English Channel, guiding a fragile monoplane through thick fog in 37 minutes. Her feat was eclipsed by Titanic headlines the next day. On 17 December 1903, the Wright brothers made 4 powered flights at Kitty Hawk, with the last lasting 59 seconds and covering 260 meters. A sudden gust toppled the flyer after landing. In 1955, a surgeon became his own crash test driver, staging 50 km/h impacts to prove seat belts protect when many feared they trapped people. After dozens of controlled hits and plenty of bruises, his results helped turn belts from optional extras into required equipment a decade later. In 1904, Norwegian archaeologists uncovered the Oseberg ship, a 9th-century burial with 2 high-status women and a trove of textiles, carved sledges, and a ceremonial wagon. Waterlogged clay preserved the oak hull. Traveling snake oil wagons in the 1890s promised cure-alls, but a 1917 test found many bottles were just mineral oil, beef fat, and red pepper, no snake involved. To fake results, some sellers spiked tonics with potent drugs, hooking buyers until the 1906 Pure Food and Drug Act started shutting the racket down. During World War I, surgeon Harold Gillies pioneered modern plastic surgery, crafting new noses from rib cartilage and rebuilding faces with his breakthrough tube pedicle flaps. At Queen Mary's Hospital in Sidcup, his team treated more than 5,000 service members. In 1910, the Cossack Guards rode as the Tsar's elite escort and were deployed to quell unrest. Within 7 years, many would face each other on opposite sides of the Civil War. Prokudin Gorsky captured them in early color, leaving one of the last vivid records of the Imperial Army before the Empire vanished. In 1938, Britain rolled out airtight baby prams with a clear dome and a hand pump, an at-home answer to looming gas war fears. Families tried the futuristic capsules, but diaries and reports noted stifling heat and crying infants. These dancers show the flapper style of the 1920s, short dresses, bob hair, and bold steps to live jazz. They challenged old rules and helped many women claim new freedom. In 1893, French biologist Louis Boutin made one of the earliest underwater photos with a camera in a copper box and a magnesium flash. Light was so weak that one exposure could take 30 minutes, and he worked in a heavy diving suit at about 50 meters to reveal a hidden world. In 1896, inventor Jesse Reno showed a new machine at Coney Island, the first moving stairs people could ride for fun. The strange ride drew big crowds and soon changed the design of train stations and stores. In 1906, the Gordon Bennett Cup sent 16 gas balloons from Paris beside the Eiffel Tower on a long race across Europe. The winner flew about 650 kilometers in about 22 hours, and the spectacle helped make ballooning a world sport. From 1900 to the 1950s, many elevators needed a trained operator who moved a lever called the floors and wore a neat uniform with white gloves. The best could stop the car level with the floor by feel alone, standing for long hours in a small cab to keep each ride smooth. In 1929, Alvin Shipwreck Kelly sat on a flagpole for 49 days, taking 15-minute naps each hour and pulling meals up by a rope. Crowds filled the street to watch the daring fad, which faded soon after the market crash that same year. In 1908, 2-year-old Puyi was placed on the dragon throne as the last emperor of China, and he cried during the rite. The Qing dynasty fell 3 years later, and he stayed inside the Forbidden City until 1924, when he was told to leave and start over. In the 1930s, firefighters demonstrated shiny asbestos suits that let them move close to intense heat. Decades later, people learned the fibers were unsafe for health, and the gear was phased out by the 1970s. In 1910, Alice Stebbins Wells became the first woman police officer in the United States with a badge and duties focused on women and children. She served for 30 years, founded a group for policewomen, and opened the door for thousands more. In 1928, a German inventor showed a mechanical television with a screen the size of a postage stamp that drew flickering shapes in 30 lines. Only a few could watch at once, yet the crowd saw moving pictures without film and sensed a future in every home. In the early 1900s, some boxing shows moved offshore on barges when many states banned the sport. Crowds rode boats to a floating ring and watched long matches under open sky. On 13 November 1907, French inventor Paul Cornu lifted his rotorcraft about 30 centimeters for 20 seconds, the first free hover in history. The light frame of bamboo and cloth shook so much that he stopped the project, and true helicopters arrived decades later. Before home refrigerators, icemen delivered 25-kilogram blocks cut in winter from frozen lakes and kept in sawdust until summer. They hauled the heavy blocks up long stairs in hot weather, a hard job that vanished when fridges spread. In 1921, Atlantic City held the first Miss America to draw visitors after summer, and contestants wore wool swimsuits that covered most of the body. By the mid-1920s, hemlines reached the knee. In 1909, Sergei Prokudin-Gorsky captured rare early color scenes of a Russian team on Kamchatka, hauling heavy gear beside active craters. Their work began the first wide survey of these volcanoes and mapped many new hot springs and vents. On February 26, 1917, New York heard one of the first live jazz broadcasts from the original Dixieland Jazz Band. The new beat startled grand rooms, yet thrilled the young, and within days the craze spread across America and reshaped popular music. In 1908, William Hoover began selling a portable electric vacuum, and door-to-door sellers would throw dust on a rug and clean it to show the power. The machine cost about $75, a big share of a yearly wage. In the 1910s, street carts sold small turtles as low-cost pets, drawing long lines of curious kids. Many lacked proper care and did not live long, and some cities later banned the trade. In the 1920s, electric washers with wringer rollers saved hours of hard hand washing. Many people got their hands caught in the rollers, so safer spin tubs became common by the 1950s. From the 1880s, milkmen left fresh glass bottles at the door before dawn because homes had no refrigerators. Routes began around 3 in the morning, and by the 1950s, most milk came in glass, until plastic and new shopping habits ended daily doorstep runs in the 1980s. From the 1700s to the 1870s, small children were sent into chimneys as narrow as 23 centimeters to clear soot by hand. The smoky work caused injuries and illness, leading to child labor reforms and the rise of long brush tools. On November 2, 1920, American women voted nationwide for the first time after the 19th Amendment. About 8 million cast ballots that day, some over 80 years old, and many wept as a long promise finally came true. Around 1900, London's horses left about 1,000 tons of waste each day, and crews shoveled streets for hours. The motor car soon cut horse traffic and helped the city escape a growing sanitation crisis. In the 1920s, funeral parlors set caskets in street windows like store goods so people could compare oak, mahogany, or metal styles. After the Civil War, embalming spread and turned mourning into a modern business with catalogs, payment plans, and bright showrooms. On April 14, 1935, a wall of dust 3 kilometers high rushed across the plains at about 100 kilometers per hour and turned day into night. Fields vanished under drifting soil, and many farm families packed up and moved west to begin again. On October 25, 1917, Bolshevik forces took the Winter Palace in Petrograd as the cruiser Aurora fired a blank shot to start the move. The takeover met little resistance and set in motion a new state that would shape the century. On June 6, 1912, Alaska's Katmai volcano sent ash over the land, and the sound carried more than 1,200 kilometers. For about 60 hours, it poured out vast magma that made the Valley of 10,000 Smokes. In the 1920s, wing walkers left the cockpit to stand, run, and do handstands on a biplane wing at about 160 kilometers per hour. Ormer Locklear made these sky acts a sensation, and crowds came to see people test the edge of flight. On March 3, 1933, a wave about 28 meters high hit the Sanriku coast and swept away many villages in minutes. It rushed like a jet across the sea, while boats offshore barely felt it, and many families on land could not escape. On January 18, 1911, pilot Eugene Ely landed a biplane on a warship using simple ropes to stop the plane. The daring test proved ships could carry planes and began the age of the aircraft carrier. On April 5, 1902, a wooden stand at Ibrox Park gave way during Scotland versus England, with thousands on it. The tragedy sparked stronger building rules and the move to steel and concrete terraces in modern stadiums. After World War I, about 4 million workers in the United States went on strike in 1919 for better pay and hours. Street clashes and hard crackdowns shaped public debate and helped lead to legal union rights in 1935. On September 2, 1882, William Jennings captured the first photo of lightning with a long exposure and steady patience. The image revealed branching paths in the flash and opened a new way to study fast events. A field team uncovers a mammoth in frozen ground, its tall tusks curved like moons. Ice can keep remains intact for tens of thousands of years, letting us study ancient life. In 1910, Roma families traveled across Europe in painted wagons, working as smiths, musicians, and fortune tellers. Rare early color photos saved a way of life that would soon face harsh pressure in the next decades. In the early 1900s, Italian newcomers sold penny ice from painted carts, ringing bells that drew children from every block. Made with hand churns and blocks of lake ice, the treat had to be sold fast before it melted, shaping ice cream culture in American cities. In the 1920s, thousands of secret bars in Chicago opened behind password doors, where jazz played and bottles passed under the table. Bootleg liquor was risky and often poorly made, yet the scene grew under corrupt protection and made fortunes. Victorian funerals were grand shows with glass hearses, black horses with plumes, and hired mourners. The high cost pushed many families into debt until simple cremations became common in the 1950s. At the dawn of mountaineering in the early 1900s, climbers faced avalanches with simple gear and no reliable forecast. A moving wall of snow could race at about 130 kilometers per hour and bury whole teams under 5 meters in seconds.